On today's show, the loss to the Falcons wasn't just a loss. This was a mirror moment for the Buccaneers, and Todd Bowles just shattered the glass. Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find us online, bucsreport.com. And the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe to the Bucs Report on YouTube, like the videos, and comment anything down below. So in this edition of the Bucs Report podcast, things are not looking good for Todd Bowles, a very measured coach at the end of the day. So when you see him going into a press conference using four-letter F words, then I think that you know not everything is going super well in the world of Todd Bowles. And, the thing of it is, I don't want to disparage or besmirch Todd Bowles too much other than to say that he was gifted with a good roster, at least initially, when he found out that he was going to be the head coach when he got called at a basketball in the game that, hey, you're the head coach. At the end of the day, I still don't think the Buccaneers reached out and vetted and found the right next head coach post Bruce Arians. That, Todd Bowles seemed like the easy thing. Well, he's already in the organization, so let's just kind of move him over a little bit and great things will happen, right? But the part where I say I don't want to disparage or besmirch or anything like that is because the results speak for themselves, right? The team has done great things, winning multiple NFC South titles, but I think that, if you watch this team, if you cover this team, that sometimes you're like, wow, a broken clock is right twice a day and all of those things. That I think that there's at least a bit of that for Todd Bowles is that, in seasons past, the poor clock mismanagement, the not going for it when it seemed like the right thing to do, that has kind of put him in the position that he's in. Now, of course, I'll eat my words. I will eat my words on the show if somehow the Buccaneers make a deep push or say something crazy happens and they win a Super Bowl. I don't think that's going to be the case. And, Todd Bowles has put himself in this position. Some people say, was Grizzard, was he the right guy? They like to bring in a lot of guys without, a hefty track record. That the teams that do it well, they bring in great coaches, and that's kind of put them in the position that they're in. So let's dive into that. In the first segment of today's show is Todd Bowles finally said the quiet part out loud, and he wasn't wrong. So let's start here because this is the moment that defines the entire season and maybe even this era of Bucs football. Todd Bowles snapping, losing it, Mr. Measured, Mr. Monotone, just losing it. Todd Bowles, the calmest dude in the building, dropping F-bombs like he's a fan sitting 3 rows up in section 132 at Ray J. That doesn't happen unless the situation is completely broken. That it was just the game before where, he said, like on any given Sunday, anything can happen. And Stroud and Versnick lit him up on the podcast. And you got to know that, just pushing aside that everything's going to be okay when the building around you is engulfed in flames, like, hey, we're fine. I'm sure the fire department's going to come up, or maybe someone with a wet blanket, right, guys? There's no wet blanket to put out this team. The Buccaneers need to get themselves out of the mess that they put themselves in. Todd Bowles and his staff that surrounds him, they have to dig the Buccaneers out of the position that they find themselves in. But when it comes to Bowles, that wasn't just frustration. That was a head coach realizing the message is no longer landing. You hear it quite often that, coaches lose the locker room, and it happens in all of professional sports. And when Bowles tells grown men to look in the effing mirror, he's admitting something huge without saying it directly. I think that if he had lost the locker room, that maybe he did now. I think that maybe a lot of the players see him as a little bit of a lame duck coach, just waiting for the season to end and them to pull the plug on Bowles and probably the surrounding staff. But, coaches can only do so much at this point of the season, right? Accountability has to come from the locker room, and it hasn't. And ultimately why they reached for those vintage vibes. If you want a litmus test or an indicator that your team has straight up gotten off the rails, is that when you bring back in JPP, and not, again, I don't want to disparage him, because if they need a leader, he could be the guy. But anyway, this is all too little too late at the end of the day. But think about what just happened. Back-to-back home losses to a Saints team that was 2-10. And I said it on the show that if they lose that game, there is no reason. There is no reason for them to lose it. It was a trap game. And ultimately, was it? And a Falcons team that was 4-9 with Kirk Cousins at the helm and still found a way to lose. It's just kind of almost too much for me to take in at times. And you're up 2 scores late, season on the line, division line still right there, and you collapse again. It wasn't bad enough losing to the Saints that were 2-10 at the time. That's not a scheme. That's not talent. That's execution, effort, and focus. And the thing I like about it is that Bowles isn't absolving himself of guilt. He's been saying all year the coaches need to do better. He needs to look in the effing mirror as well. But this was different. This was him saying, I've done all I can do. I've pushed him in the right direction, like, push, and let go. Okay, keep pedaling. Oh, they fell. I feel like Todd Bowles is pushing a kid learning to ride a bike for the first time. Like, you got it, kid. You got it. I'm letting go now. Oh, and that's what happened. He can only do so much. And now it's on the guys. And when he says it's a small select few getting them beat. It's the defense. And, it's Baker not being Baker. And that's the scariest part, because that matters more, because the problem is specific and everyone in the locker room knows exactly who he's talking about. This was a turning point. Either the team responds or the season is effectively over, even if the math says otherwise. I talked about it in the last podcast, and it remains true as well, that the future is in their hands. It's ultimately up to the Buccaneers to take grasp of it and do the thing and win these games here. Because, on paper, it seemed like this team was really good. But then when you kind of look at it under a microscope, you're like, wow, it's like finding something moldy in the fridge. I thought my fridge was clean, but there's mold in here. There's a little bit of mold in the Buccaneers locker room that I think that needs some bleach treatment. Because if not now, there's going to be changes between now, the end of this season, and next season. So that's what we're hoping for. Buccaneers, dig deep. Do the things that got you in the position that you were in earlier in the season when you were 5-1 at the best point of the season. That is what they have to do if they want to have continued success. There's no really ands, ifs, or buts about it. All right, so coming up here after the break, biggest takeaway, Baker Mayfield. Yes, people owning what they've done wrong. Baker Mayfield owned the loss, and that actually matters. Why? I'll discuss next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report podcast, part of the Bucs Report podcast network, also simulcast on the Bucs Minicast podcast feed, a part of the Fans First Sports Network. So let's talk about, players and coaches owning their mistakes. And, when you take a look at Baker Mayfield, a guy with happy feet, and ultimately, I think that we know that he's not playing 100%, as evident out on the field. Can still scramble, but, I talked about this. If you followed along with me this entire season on this podcast, for one, thank you so much. But I talked about that at some point, the rubber was going to meet the road, right? That Baker Mayfield and his happy feet, and then not even diving anymore when he's getting ready to get hit, just that all of a sudden, he got injured, right? And did miss a substantial amount of time, but I still think is not playing 100%. But let's talk about Baker as he owns his mistakes as well. So let's talk about Baker, because I know some of you already warming up the trade machine, right? That in a league of what have you done for me lately, it goes from a love fest to get the fuck out of my house and take your dog with you. But that matters. Baker didn't deflect. He didn't hide behind the defense, giving up late drives. He did do the quarterback thing where you say we instead of I. He flat out said the interception cannot happen. The demons, the ghosts of Baker Mayfield past came back to haunt him. And that miss to Emeka Egbuka cannot happen. And this one's going to haunt me, he said. That's leadership, period. That it was right there. The game was right there for the taking, but I lost it. And now we're in the position that we're in, that the Buccaneers really need to heat up and, like I said, find where they were earlier in the season. But is Baker Mayfield perfect? No. Is he streaky? Yeah. Has he regressed since the 6-2 start? Absolutely. But here's the reality nobody wants to admit. There is no better option walking through that door next year, because it's Teddy Bridgewater, and it doesn't get much better after that. The draft isn't saving you. Free agency sure as hell isn't saving you unless you want, Daniel Jones or a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. And no, just no. Baker is dealing with inconsistent play calling. He's dealing with injuries. He's dealing with young receivers he doesn't fully trust yet. I don't think he had it on his bingo card that Tez Johnson and Cade Otton were going to be so targeted so many times. And yeah, he made mistakes, but when the head coach lights the building on fire and the quarterback steps up and says, put it on me, that's not the guy you move on from lightly. That is a guy that's taken the sword and fallen right on it. Even though that sword should go in the chest of every other player out there, he is the guy that did just that. So what needs to happen is Baker needs to be stabilized. He needs rhythm. He needs protection. He needs weapons he trusts. And he has them now, right? I talked about it in the last episode. Evans, Godwin, McMillan, Egbuka. Because when he's right, the offense can still move the ball. The problem is they haven't been right in weeks. And that's what puts us in the position that we're in right now. And if the locker room fractures, if players stop believing, the quarterback owning it might be the only thing keeping this thing from completely imploding. That there's a lot at stake right now, guys, right? And they have to dig deep. They have got to dig deep to get themselves out of the mess that they're in. And Baker Mayfield and his great play, his scrambling, and like I said, to start the season, those late game heroics is ultimately what put the Buccaneers in first place. Their inability to fully put the boot down to their opponent's neck and apply a little pressure is what let Carolina sneak into this thing. That is the ugly thing sitting in the corner. Carolina, ooh, are you going to fail? Because I'm going to take it from you. That's what Carolina, that's who they are. They're the ugly thing sitting in the room waiting for you to make a mistake. Lose to Carolina, make it 2 losses. It's over. And they walk away in victory lane, and the Buccaneers are left scratching their head going, how did we get ourselves in this position? That Baker Mayfield in the Love Fest, MVP has evaporated. Todd Bowles and his positive outlook on this team has evaporated, and we find ourselves in damn near must-win territory, right? That we have got to make hay while the sun shines, as they say up north here. So that is ultimately what the Buccaneers need to do. They need to dig deep. The season counts on it because, I'm glad that you started really well. That means 0 right now. They've got to find a way to dig deep and pick up some big wins against some opponents that shouldn't really be that difficult. The Saints should have been a walk in the park. The Falcons should have been a walk in the park. And the damn Carolina Panthers, where the hell did they come from anyway? That I definitely did not think that Dave Canales and that group was going to be able to about face that team, but he did just that. Buckle up, Bucs fans. It is not going to get any easier. All right, so coming up here after the break, the biggest takeaway, the roster has fooled us, and the cracks were always there. Straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report podcast. So let's keep rolling here. And was this roster just a bit of fool's gold this entire season? Because let's be honest with ourselves for a second. What was it? It was not the 5-0. It was the 6-2 start. It was smoke and mirrors. Those close wins early in the season weren't signs of toughness. They were warning signs that, okay, we bailed out. Baker bailed us out, but we cannot pat ourselves too hard on the back thinking that we did that. Falcons, Texans, Jets, Seahawks, all wins by 3 points or less. Now, fast forward, Patriots, Saints, Falcons, all losses by basically the same margin. Fool's gold at the end of the day. The difference is the ball isn't bouncing our way anymore. This team didn't suddenly get bad. They were always this close to falling apart. Can you take a car with a donut spare on it across country? Maybe, but I wouldn't count on it. So if the Buccaneers are hoping that the donut that they have riding on as a spare right now is going to get them across country for their New York to LA vacation, then they're really living on a whole lot of more hope than optimism than I have in my arsenal. And the tight end room is the perfect example. I like Cade Otton. He's fine, but fine does not cut it. He doesn't scare anyone. He doesn't dominate in the red zone. He doesn't change the game plan. And if your tight end room is just a bunch of guys who are kind of good at everything, but great at nothing, defenses don't respect it, and I think that is why the Buccaneers are in the position that they're in, because it's not even just that. Edge rusher, disaster. Outside of Yaya Diaby, who has not been that great, it's a wasteland. 1-year rentals, no juice, no real rear factor. I hate saying, but it's time. Levante David is a legend. Ring of Honor, possibly Hall of Fame, but football does not care about legacy. It cares about now and right now, that this unit cannot run, cannot cover, and cannot close. Let me circle back to what I said, and I've said this all season long about, these late game heroics, and is it sustainable? Falcons, Texans, Jets, Seahawks all won by 3 points or less. So say you lose Falcons, Texans, and take Jets, Seahawks. Just that's what I'm talking about. That when the Buccaneers were playing their best football this season, that best was not really that great in comparison. That they got lucky. And you can't say, hey, you got lucky. A win's a win and a loss is a loss. Okay, then it is. Then the last game, the Patriots, Saints, and Falcons, I don't want to hear any excuses. They're losses. If we're going with that kind of logic. And I talk about that on all the different podcasts that I do, that there are wins against certain teams that take you a step or two further than what they do for you in the standings. They're moral victories. They're like, yeah, we beat those guys. Conversely, losing to the goddamn Saints and Falcons, that sets you back more than just a loss. So I don't want any, people just living in just this alternate reality that, I guess when I talk about my life, glass half full, glass half empty, I guess, to a certain extent, sometimes I'm a glass half empty, because the shit that we see out there like this is ultimately what I'm talking about. Because, the mistakes and the standings cannot lie about this team anymore. They're a meh football team right now. And to all the people drinking the creamsicle Kool-Aid, look yourself in the mirror. That's who this team is in 2025. A meh team that got lucky because they're playing in a deplorable NFC South. That's where we're at right now. And that's the hard part, is looking at the reality in the face. You know, that you think you're the beauty queen because your mama told you so. And then you go to school and everyone's like, not so much. That is ultimately who the Bucs are. That when you listen to, the people that surround them, like, you guys are the greatest, but the NFL has exposed the Bucs for exactly the ugly person that they are. And that's the tough thing right now, is that the Buccaneers need a facelift in a hurry. They need an image change. They need the players that put them in the position that they were earlier in the season to do it, because they got lucky. And I'm going to say lucky here, that people say luck doesn't have any place in sports. BS. It does. Those losses that were won by a margin of 3 points or less are lucky. The luck ran out. That's why we're in the position that we're in right now. How does it taste, Bucs Nation? And that's the hard part, right? That there's going to need to be big changes that are made. If for some reason this damn team misses the NFC South, considering where they started, there needs to be a come to Jesus moment, and the Glazers need to be bringing everyone out there. Come to us. We need a change here. And what am I saying? Big picture. That Light and Jason Light and what he did looked like a masterclass. Not enough was done. When you reach for a rabbit and you pull out a JPP, that's not good. That's reaching for a cyanide capsule. So I think that the Buccaneers need to do something in a hurry. But there's not enough runway, right? They're in the position that they're in. There's, like I said, when you're reaching for JPP, a guy that was really great years ago, but, probably sitting at home watching TV, eating Doritos, watching Jerry Springer going, you want me to come practice and try out? All right, I'll be there, coach. That's where we're at. So it's a tough position for the Bucs to be in. But it's a position that they've put themselves in, and ultimately up to them to dig themselves out of it. All right, so coming up here after the break, the season isn't dead yet, but everything has to change immediately. Next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report Podcast Network, also part of the Bucs Minicast, part of the Fans First Sports Network. So let's dive into the final segment of today's tirade. I'm just going to call it what it is. Dan's coming unglued because how did we get here? How did we get here? That is the question. And I think ultimately what has me the most pissed off, I guess you could say. So like I said, the season isn't dead yet, but everything has got to change immediately. And here's the wild part. The Bucs are still alive thanks to the Saints. Yes, that's Saints. Thank you, Saints. 2 games against Carolina. Win those, you probably win the division. That's insane considering how this feels, but it only matters if something changes. Not talk, not meetings, not slogans, actual on-field change. Players holding players accountable, missed assignments getting called out, effort being non-negotiable, no more sleepwalking through third quarters, no more late game collapses. Tristan Wirfs said he hopes everybody lets this loss stew. The question is, can this team dig deep enough? That's the right mindset, because if this team just flushes it and moves on like it's business as usual, they're done. And the legacy that's left behind, Levante David last season, Mike Evans, who knows how much longer, Godwin, all these guys on the back nine. The legacy out there is being tarnished by the poor play late in the 25 season. And Todd Bowles, he threw the grenade. Baker took the ownership, and now we find out who's actually listening. Baker Mayfield, you need to do the damn thing we brought you here for, throwing touchdowns, right? But also the leadership. And he's been that guy. He's been the big brother to this team that Tom Brady, the dad, never was. Relatable, younger, and ultimately what put the Buccaneers in this position. Because if they don't look in the mirror, this offseason is going to do it for them. And what kind of changes is that going to mean for this Buccaneers team, right? Big changes. and expect players to move on, expect potential GM, head coach. They could tear it down to the studs and rebuild the whole damn thing. It really could happen. That's where we're at right now. I didn't think this was going to be the case. I worried that it might be. But here we are, staring us directly in the face. And it's the ugly face that you don't want to look at, but it's the one that's looking at you in the mirror. The question is now, how do the Buccaneers dig deep enough to dig themselves out of the hole they've dug for themselves? Listen, I want to thank you once again for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report, part of the Bucs Report podcast network, the Bucs Minicast, and the Fans First Sports Network. And I'll talk to you again next time.